the first time I met our next reader was almost a year ago. We were half naked in a pool doing wrestling moves with Sean Leonard. And there he told me a story about a not-to-be-named MFA, a promise for funding that turned out to be a lie, and an insect-ridden trailer in California. I won't say that I'm happy about the things he's endured, but because of all of that, he found himself back here among family and friends, and I'm happy that he did. Please welcome Scott.
Hello. Can everybody hear me? Okay. It took me a while to kind of figure out exactly what story I wanted to read. But in the end, I decided, it was probably fitting that I would read something it's from my very first class in the MFA program. It was Miley's, I don't know if she's here, but Miley's Gothic Forms. Oh, cool. Hi, Miley. So this is a story from that class, and because of time constraints, I can only read the first half of it, but basically, on a basic level, it's a story about a couple who aren't quite sure that they're a couple still, but they met tonight to have dinner and kind of figure it out, but also it's also about illness. And actually, here comes for the audience participation part of the reading. There's going to be a light switch on the right-hand side right there, and if you can flip off the last switch, and or that works. And because it's only half a story, I figured why not play some images that you can look at while I read. Yeah. And it's called Moon Fog. The unusually low fog came creeping in off the bay, through the alleyways and into the main arterial streets, playing tricks on his already troubled head, with the obscuring and skewing of things, the headlights of lurching cars providing backlight for the figures that moved about behind the thick curtain, undulating like smoke until, surprise, they emerged face first, floating out from the depths. Are you even listening to me? Eva stopped and turned abruptly so that Todd, who had been trailing behind, almost bumped into her. I was listening, he said. Something about shoes? Eva didn't answer, but looked at Todd in that way she'd been doing lately and asked him for the third time that night, "Babe, are you okay?" He took too long to answer. We don't have to be out if you don't want to, she said. Well, we're already out, he said. I mean, we can go back. Todd sighed. No, let's just go, okay? We're almost there. The restaurant was just a few blocks away, but neither made a move. Standing there, they impeded the flow of sidewalk traffic and were beginning to get jostled by the human stream that moved quickly, almost violently, in the cold fog. She touched his arm. You sure? Yeah, besides, we're already dressed anyway. He didn't have to say that last bit. She hesitated, wanting to forgive him, but not so easily. He sensed this. Your dress looks nice. It did. The black dress clung to her body in all the right places. It was a bit too thin for this cold, perhaps. The headlights, strong enough to penetrate the fog, revealed like an X-ray her lack of bra and underwear. Before leaving, there'd been talk of a coat, but no, she ran hot. She smiled. She wanted to recreate the sense of excitement they'd had back when they first started dating. It had been sexy, even naughty. But lately, he seemed disinterested, and not just in her. He hadn't been eating or going out much, and when he wasn't sleeping, would hole up in front of the computer. She looked up his internet search history when he went to work and found pages on vision problems, optometrists, disembodiment, and moon facts. When she confronted him about it later, he confessed to having these bouts where he couldn't tell where his limbs were or what they were doing, and sometimes didn't even have control over what his eyes were focusing on. What do you mean, she had said. Give me an example. Well, I was at my desk the other day, just taking a break, had my eyes closed, and after a while I noticed that I couldn't feel my arm. I couldn't tell its positioning, like if I had it hanging down at my side or up across my lap, you know? I thought that was strange, so I opened my eyes and saw my arm was actually on the desk and I was holding a pencil. But I couldn't feel it, and don't even remember grabbing the pencil. It's like I didn't even recognize it as my arm. How weird, she said. That's not the worst of it, though. When I talk to people, naturally I look them in the face, but lately I can only see one part of their face at a time. Like only their lips and left eye, or maybe their nose, or even just one nostril and their eyebrow, and everything else is sort of blurred out. I can't really explain it. It's like I can't take in their whole face at once, and since they're talking, their face is moving, just moving around, and it looks so grotesque that I start to feel sick. My God, how awful. How come you didn't tell me all this before? Nothing to tell. The optometrist said my eyes are perfectly healthy. My blood tests came back inconclusive. They said it's probably just fatigue, stress, but I don't know. Is this stuff still happening to you? Yeah, he said. I'm thinking about seeing a specialist or something. I'm sorry, babe. She hugged him. That must be so scary. She ran her fingers through his hair, and they were silent for a while. Then she said, "What's up with all the moon pics you have saved on the computer?" Todd tensed up, and she backed away to look at his face. The color was drained from it and kind of resembled the moon itself. "What's the matter?" "I don't know," he said, and pulled her to him again to escape her eyes. It was okay for a while following that night, but after Todd went to see the specialist, who'd also reached an inconclusive diagnosis, he became even more withdrawn, started sleeping more during the day, and spent nights staring out the window. Eva tolerated this at first, but when he started calling in sick to work, they'd fought. "Inconclusive," she'd said. "Nothing was found. That's good, right? So why are you being like this?" But inconclusive doesn't mean the absence of something. Something's there. They just can't find it. I've told you this. It isn't hard to understand. Don't give me that crap. You're not a doctor. If several trained professionals can't find anything, then maybe there's nothing to find. What are you saying? You think I'm making this shit up? You think I'm nuts? I didn't say that. It just seems like you want to be sick. Why search out for some kind of diagnosis when there doesn't seem to be one? I'm just trying to understand. Oh God, he'd said, if that's what you think of me. I don't know what to say. Eva left that night to spend some time away at her mother's. After a few days, they'd talked over the phone and agreed that they'd get together tonight to see where things stood. She'd taken the time to look good for Todd, and so was a bit annoyed at his appearance now. He'd missed a button on his coat, had uncombed hair, unironed pants, and an overall appearance of But then she noticed his face, so pale of late, and saw that his forehead was covered with a light sheen of sweat, and she suddenly felt ashamed. She pulled him away from the pedestrian traffic and over to the side by a tarot shop window. "Todd." She trailed off. Speaking to him now came with hesitation, and she didn't want it to be like this. She hooked a lock of hair that had fallen onto his brow and raked it into place. As her nails skipped over his temple, he closed his eyes, giving hers a chance to dart about his face, and she quickly thumbed a patch of hair that had escaped his razor. She fought the urge to check his temperature, his pulse. "Todd," Eva said, "are you sure you're okay?" An impossible question. It made Todd frustrated to hear it because he so badly wanted to answer it, to know it was himself. So he said nothing and avoided her eyes, fixated on the small window, at the fortune teller's purple-black orb glinting wetly behind the glass. Eva crossed her arms in response to his silence. He wondered if he should tell her about what happened that night of the full moon, about the night he woke gasping into his wet pillow, his lungs contracting, wanting air that wasn't there. His face was buried deep, his head heavy and vision dark, and for a moment he thought Eva was pressing his head down into the pillow, as she sometimes did, saying "die," but playfully, because he was a stomach sleeper and she found that funny, thought it looked like he was trying to suffocate himself. So he'd laughed, let out a muffled "hey," and waited for the hand to give. When he realized there was no hand, he tried to lift his head, but it seemed heavy, too heavy, and he could only raise it a few inches. He tried to prop himself up with his arm, but his body was unresponsive from the neck down, and his head sank into the pillow again. What the hell, he thought. He'd have panicked more if he weren't concentrating on jutting out his jaw in order to allow him the space to breathe. Where's my arm, he thought, the one he usually threw out in front of him, his sleeping arm, she called it, the one he always rested his forehead on when he slept. Some internal calculation told him his arms were arranged at his sides, straight down like a corpse, but he couldn't be sure. He almost laughed again. My body is asleep, he thought. Why aren't I? He worked his head a little at a time until it faced full left, wanting to see where Eva was. She wasn't in bed, but he felt that someone was watching him. Owl-like, he forced his head a few more unspeakable degrees and met the huge jaundiced eye of the moon. The shock of it seeing his window, so large and close-seeming, thrummed through his body, awakened it, maybe too much so, filling it with the paresthesia of pins and needles and a sort of electrical surge at the cellular level that made it seem like he was levitating off the bed. He was unable to break the moon's gaze the entire time. Sure, something was being passed between them, an understanding, something communicable, but before he could figure it, he'd passed out. He wanted to tell her all this, but her impatience and her crossed arms stopped him. He reached for her instead and was glad to see her unfold, allowing herself to be pulled in. "I'm okay," he said. They embraced and looked over each other's shoulders, Todd to the window and Eva to the street. They were quiet. The breathing would do just fine for a while, the white plumes of their breaths drifting out into the mist around them. A gigantic silver fish appeared out of the gloom, gasping to a stop at the curb. It expelled its contents, a few gaunt faces in the fog, their features blurring, legs stepping onto the sidewalk and mixing in with the sea of people bobbing there, or stepping off and slipping past the cars, bumping along the street. She whispered into his ear, "You're still not seeing things, are you?" His head was starting to ache again. He closed his eyes. No. And that's the first half of that. So.